Nexus PMG welcomes you to the Bigger Than Us podcast, which we as energy geeks lovingly refer to as the BTU. Bigger Than Us is a podcast that focuses on ideas that will shape the future of our planet and ultimately our existence. We will occasionally lean into energy topics because, after all, it's the key to our collective survival. But we'll also explore other ideas and topics that we believe will have an impact that is bigger than us. And now, on to today's show. Hello and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. I'm your host, Raj Daniels, and today I'd like to welcome Stuart Davies to the show. Stuart's focus is on driving growth and profitability at ORPC through overseeing the commercial rollout of the company's demonstrated and proven technology in the US, Canada, and Chile. Prior to becoming CEO of ORPC in early 2020, Stuart was an investor in early-stage companies with a primary focus on companies with products and services that either reduced carbon emissions or improved the health of the environment. Stuart, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Raj. Thank you so much for inviting me to this.
Stuart, thank you for being on, and I'm excited to speak to you. Stuart, where are you currently located?
Right now, I'm in a suburb of Boston, Massachusetts, and obviously our company is in Portland, Maine. But due to the current pandemic, Maine and Massachusetts are not allowing intraday travel anymore. So I had been going up, 3 or 4 days a week, but now we're quarantined and the border is closed. So I'm working remotely.
Well, I trust you and your family are safe and well.
So far, so good. We've had a few scares with two college kids and someone just out of college, but we've so far been okay.
You know, they're calling the college kids super spreaders.
Actually, our guys have been really careful during this whole thing, so I give them credit. They've been really good, and I think it was really hard. April through March through June, we had. My wife and I thought we were going to be empty nesters, and we wound up having 5 at home. So a little change. So
up that grocery shopping, right?
Yes, my 2 boys are both about 6'4" and 230 pounds. So yes, the grocery bill was a lot bigger than normal.
Wow. Well, Stuart, I like to open the show by asking my guest the following question: if you were asked to share something interesting about yourself, what would it be?
So I've heard you ask this question to other guests, and most have given such great, interesting answers and have set a really high bar, which I probably won't achieve. But I decided to go for something a bit more random. But I would say that I am someone who enjoys pulling a harmless prank or being on the receiving end of one, especially around the holidays, which, as I was thinking about the podcast here over the Thanksgiving break, that's what made me think of this topic. So couple of examples. Once during the middle of a large holiday party, I converted the host's elegant bathroom into a Frosty the Snowman themed room, complete with area rugs, toilet seat covers, and themed Kleenex boxes in about 3 minutes. Another time, I snuck an 8-foot inflatable snowman into a friend's front yard while they were out to dinner, and had it peering through their front window when they came home. And if I walk up to your holiday tree, commenting on how nice your ornaments are, that probably means I'm in the process of leaving a cheesy ornament with hanging on it with a picture of my wife and me that you'll find at the end of the holiday season when you're taking the tree down.
I love that, especially around the holiday time. So my brother used to live in a home, and he used to have those deer out front, the ones that have lights on them.
Yeah.
And every year, a good friend of mine and I would go to his house and move those things around, usually around Christmas Eve. And there were a couple of times where my brother just got so tired of it, he would complain to us the day after, "I can't believe these kids came to my house, da da da." And we probably did it for about 8 years in a row until he moved, and he didn't ever realize that it was us doing it. And I don't think he still knows. So there you go.
Well, it was good. My old employer it was good give and take. So on the receiving end, I've had my office wrapped completely in tinfoil, and that was because I stuffed someone's overhead cabinets with a couple hundred ping pong balls, and then I've had fat heads of me that are like life-size posters of me as a high school basketball player covering the hallways of the office. I showed up one morning to that, but probably my best prank, and I sent you this picture, which was in preparation for this. But a mentor of mine was going away. She was leaving Sankaty Advisors to teach at Harvard Business School, and our firm name Sankaty was named after the Sankaty Lighthouse on Nantucket. So I found a guy who could make a 6 foot tall replica of the lighthouse. I set it up in her office and created a beach scene around it using 25 boxes of Rice Krispies for sand, miniature beach balls, and a fog machine. I brought a fog machine for special effects because if you have a lighthouse, you need fog. And unfortunately, the fog machine actually set off the smoke alarm in the tallest building in downtown Boston. So I was immediately on the phone explaining to building security and to stop sending the fire department. There was no fire. So it was a good life lesson in unintended consequences as well.
Knock-on effect. I love that, though. I think we're kind of losing some of those, practical joke moments, especially in schools. Like I mentioned earlier, I have 3 young ones, and they're so bound to staying within the rules, and even a little gag or prank out of order gets them sent to the principal's office. So I look forward to maybe perhaps continuing that as they get older and out of school.
Yeah, it's certainly that's certainly the case. But anyway, it's a good stress reliever. So
I agree.
I haven't being on remote, I haven't had the opportunity to be up to my usual tricks at ORPC, but hopefully that will happen soon.
Well, speaking of ORPC, can you give the audience an overview of the organization and your role?
Sure. So the Ocean Renewable Power Company, or ORPC, uses power from free-flowing rivers and tides to provide sustainable energy solutions. We're headquartered in Portland, Maine. We have 28 employees in Portland, Montreal, Dublin, Anchorage, and Seattle. And our mission is to provide 100% renewable energy solution to off-grid communities. So our first target markets are mostly Indigenous communities and ecotourism facilities in Alaska, Northern Canada, and Patagonia, Chile. This is about a $15 billion market, actually, and globally, about 1 billion people live either without electricity or use noisy, polluting diesel generators to produce electricity, which creates not only a high level of CO2 per kilowatt hour as well, but numerous carcinogens. If you look at the global carbon emission picture through 2100, the biggest increase in emissions will come from developing economies. So the most urgent priority is to reach these markets first with sustainable local renewable energy options and provide them with economic incentives to adopt these solutions now. And ORPC has invented some of the lowest emission producing renewable energy systems around. And if we can get our products to these markets, it will be the equivalent of taking 350 million cars off the road. So we're just moving into commercialization of our technology. And our first commercial power system is in one of those places now. It's the remote village of Igiagig, Alaska. It'll be a spelling test for your listeners. Our RivGen system has been sending energy to its community grid for about 14 months, which is longer than any other hydrokinetic device in North America. And we're displacing diesel fuel, which the village has to actually fly in at an exorbitant price, which risks the health of the river they're on, which is called the Kvichak River. And it was in the news recently about the Pebble mine, but it's known for its largest sockeye salmon migration in the world. So next summer, we're going to install our second RivGen device, a battery storage system, and a smart microgrid control system. And that's going to enable the village to move off their diesel generators or move them to backup power roles. So our renewable energy solution will result in a 90% reduction in diesel use and CO2 emissions. So we're hoping to take that as a model project and take that around the world.
So can you share perhaps just an idea of what they were paying and what they will be paying going forward for energy?
So there's subsidies in place, but if you work through unsubsidized, it's about 92 cents a kilowatt hour, and your average American pays about 13 cents. So and if you look at the communities that we're targeting in Canada, Alaska, and Chile, they pay between 40 cents a kilowatt hour, and we've seen as high as $1.40 a kilowatt hour. So in terms of there's a lot of discussion of energy equality. We're addressing the need with a renewable solution to communities that are paying some of the highest percentages of their family's income in the world. And in addition, these communities are getting hardest hit. If you look at where climate change is impacting communities the most, the largest part of the temperature increase is coming at the North Pole.
And you mentioned fish earlier, and I'm going to guess that fish and wildlife are a big part of these people's lives. How does your unit, does it damage wildlife? How does it work?
So it does not impede the river in any way, and there's room. Our turbine is just not rotating that quickly. My analogy is it's kind of like watching a 8-year-old bike ride a bicycle up a steep hill. It's just not moving that fast, and so. But we've had over 1 million fish interactions with our device. We've done 12 different deployments in our history, and we've documented over 1 million fish interactions, and we've had no recorded fish injuries or fish mortality. So we have cameras on our device, and we were supposed to have inspectors on the ground to watch the smolt, which are baby fish, the out migration out of Lake Iliamna last spring, and then as the adult sockeye salmon came back, we were supposed to have monitors there, but just given COVID, we weren't able to get people there, so we actually did not operate or during that time. But next season we're kind of geared up and hoping to have everyone there.
Now, I believe you said the RivGen system has been operating for 14 months. What were some of the challenges getting the system approved and installed?
So there's a variety of permits that are required. You have to get approval from, you need a FERC license. You need, Fish and Wildlife. So there's a maze of, regulatory and environmental permitting that you need to get done. And I think that's one of the strengths of our team. We've done these 12 deployments. We have a dedicated staff who's focused on not only addressing these issues to get individual approvals, but also to work with regulators to simplify the process for approvals going forward.
And how were the conversations with the Indigenous people that you're helping up there?
I think our project in Igiagig would not be successful without the engagement of that community and the leadership of Alexandra Salmon, who is the head of the village and her team. We have a weekly call with them. Any issue that comes up, we work with them. We have a great working relationship to resolve any issues. And for example, we were able to get our 2 people on the ground, despite COVID, and have them quarantined properly, and we're able to work on the device with some of the community members. They brought their local knowledge, and we've trained them on how to maintain our device, and we hope to just have them do that 100% of the time going forward. But just a great relationship to make sure we were able to bring it up and inspect it and put it back down here last August and September. With no problem in terms of COVID, and that's obviously a really high degree. There's a high degree of concern around that in these communities. So we were able to do that successfully. And again, there's always little issues that come up along the way, and they've just been a great partner all the way along, the entire time.
So you touched on it briefly there. My next question was going to be about partnerships from an employment standpoint. Is the model to deploy the unit into an area and then have the Indigenous people part of, I guess, the solution of working on the unit?
That's right. So the unit is designed for a 20, 30-year life. And if you look at it sits on a pontoon boat effectively. And I'll oversimplify, but you push a button and one pontoon, and then the other pontoon fills with water and it sinks to the bottom, and then you turn it on. And if you want to bring it back up, we just hit another button and we blow the water out and put compressed air into the pontoon and bring it back to the surface. So it makes it very easy to do maintenance. And it's we've been at this since 2004. So we designed a very safe system to pull up a small boat, to dock it onto the device, and there's a walkway with a railing for you to do work. And so the idea is that these remote communities are challenging to get to, and there's a real opportunity for job creation around. There's not much. We're not anticipating a lot of maintenance. Kind of every 5 years, bring it to the surface, but they're. For these first 10 or 20 units, there'll be annual inspections where we'll work with the communities to bring that up and have their local residents, trained to do that work. And then obviously when we're deploying it, we, again, over half of the people involved with the project, and we would anticipate that going forward to even have a higher percentage of that, where we're working with the local community to assemble the device, in the assembly area, push it out into the water and set the anchor and set it down. So there's a lot of local job creation that we can do there as well.
So does the unit stay in the same place, or does it go upriver, downriver? Does it move at all?
No, it's anchored in place, and it's these rivers are moving 10 feet a second type of thing. So it's obviously a very challenging environment to operate in, but we have an anchoring and mooring system that it sits down on the bottom, but there's an anchor kind of set upstream from it that holds it in place.
Now, it might be a little bit technical for the audience, but I'm really curious as to some of the sensors or, any kind of intelligence that you're using on the unit.
I won't get into it in too much detail, but we have a range of health and wellness data that we get from the device. So we can, and again, as I mentioned, we have cameras there as well, so we can capture images of how it's doing, and we have some videos on our website. But the water in the VJAC is so clear; they actually drink the water straight out of the river. We get some very clear camera pictures, but there's a lot of data on rotational speed and water temperature, water speed, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a lot of data collection that happens.
So earlier this year, you testified in front of Congress. Can you share what that was about and perhaps some of the opportunities you explained to the government?
So I think where the river and tidal industries are, and broadly they're called hydrokinetics, or MHK is the acronym. I just call it river and tidal. But where those are, we're where wind and solar were about 10 years ago. So there's probably 6 or 7 companies now that have had a device that has been installed and operated for 6 months or longer. I think we're the longest in North America at 14 consecutive months. But if you think about where wind and solar were 10 years ago, they've proven out they could operate for a long period of time. They've proven out they could generate power. And then it was really this, the design was in place, and there's been further refinement to the design, but then it's been a real kind of virtuous cycle over the last 10 years of building more and installing more devices, which has driven the cost down at the same time. And it's also gotten a lot of manufacturers interested in participating in that supply chain, which has then accelerated redesigns and further cost reduction. So if you look at wind 10 years ago versus today, I believe costs have come down about 70%. For solar, it's come down about 90%. So I really think our industry is at a position where, and we're in this position, we have a design, we feel like it works. We actually have kind of a near-term plan where, again, we think we're going to drive output on a given device up 40 or 50% here in the next 12 or 18 months, just with the modeling we've been doing around software and what we've learned on drag and from this first deployment. And then also, we've had initial conversations with our supply chain to say, okay, if we were making 10 of these devices at a time instead of one, what would our costs come down? And the initial indications are, at least 25 or 30%. And then I would point out that, when we call 10 people to make a part, when you're only making one, you only have kind of 1 or 2 companies come back and bid on it. So we're also in the process of reaching out to those other 8 companies to say, okay, we're going to make 5 or 10 of these here in the next year. Do you want to bid on this, on this part? And the nice thing about our technology, when you look at it, is most of the pieces on there look like auto parts or, in agriculture equipment parts, et cetera. So really the conversation that I had with the Senate and what we wanted to kind of get out there for congressional leaders to understand is where the state of the industry is, and that what the industry needs support in is really putting devices in the water here over the next 2 to 3 years so we can start that same virtuous cycle that wind and solar saw over the last 10 years.
Now, North America project, I understand, just because of local and geography. Why Chile?
So, Patagonia is, so if you think about our initial target markets, these are off-grid communities. I'm not looking. ORPC is not looking to compete with wind and solar. We're too expensive, right? If you want to be on the grid today, you're going to need to be at 5 or 7 cents a kilowatt hour, and it's going to take us a few years to get down that curve. So these off-grid communities have the highest power costs in the world, and if you think about Patagonia as well as northern Alaska and northern Canada, solar has a tough challenge competing with us because 4 months out of the year they're getting less than 6 hours of daylight a day. And then we had mentioned we'd been operating for 14 months. During the winter we had temperatures that got below negative 40 degrees, and so that's a real challenging environment for historically has for smaller wind installations with icing. You get it's 30 degrees and snowing, and then you get kind of ice buildup on the device, and then it drops to minus 30, and you have cracking and things of that nature. So there's we feel like these markets are on the one hand very challenging to operate in, but we have designed a device that works there.
Appreciate that. I'm going to switch gears here and get to the crux of our conversation, which is the why behind what you do. Now, in my research, I came across an article. You're an investor in the company, but you have quite a varied background. You took over the helm, I think, January of this year. What's your why? Why did you decide to perhaps start with invest in this company, and what motivates you? What keeps you going?
Sure. So, a little bit on my background. So I joined Sanctity Advisors. I mentioned that in the Lighthouse, and it's a division of Bain Capital. I joined there in 1999. And at the time, our group had 10 people. We were in a small, cramped office in Boston and had under $1 billion in assets under management. And I was there for 17 years. And when I left, we were managing, 35 billion and had 240 people on 4 continents. And I was part of the leadership team that was responsible for that growth. And honestly, I'm proud of what we accomplished there. But I decided I wanted to have a second act to my business career. And so in my investment career, it was great. I was involved in lots of different industries and company sizes. So I'd worked with large companies and small companies. I invested in debt. I invested in equity, different industries, metals and mining, energy, food, retail, consumer products. Was on the boards of over 20 companies on that time, so really involved with strategy and direction the companies were going. But I never really worked with startups. So when I left in 2016, I kind of focused my energies on early stage companies, and I was really just focused on ones that had a strong corporate mission. And so I happened to have a mutual friend of Chris Sauer, who was the founder of ORPC. And I started working with him and coming up to Portland, a few days a month and working with the company and meeting the team. And last December, Chris decided to retire and asked me if I wanted to be CEO. And, while I'd, had a leadership role at Sanctity, I'd never, sat in the CEO seat. So I thought I just love the company's mission. And to me, as I think about all the companies I've looked at and invested over my career, I think ORPC might have the single best corporate mission of any company I've come across. When you think about it, we're bringing renewable energy to Indigenous communities and communities of color around the world who either currently have no access to power or pay 5 to 10 times what the average American pays for electricity. And in the process, we're creating some of the, those what they're using for generation is for electricity is generating some of the highest CO2 emissions on Earth. So we're bringing sustainable, affordable energy that's predictable and taking their diesel generators offline at the same time.
So right there on your website, it says improving people's lives and their environment through sustainable energy solutions. It's a very strong corporate mission. Why is a strong corporate mission important to you?
Look, I think as you haven't covered the energy space, and other companies, you see all the plastic waste building up in the oceans. You see, the path we're on carbon emissions, and it just, for me, it's as you think about what you want to leave behind. For me, it was like, okay, I'm not someone who's going to invent the next thing. I'm a finance guy, right? Economics major. I'm not an engineer, but I felt like I could bring skill sets on how to develop and grow a business. And so for me, I want to look back on my career and say, okay, I helped this company, grow and accomplish this mission, and that it was having a positive impact on the environment and the world we're leaving behind for our kids and grandkids.
So you've been in this seat about a year now. What are some of the most valuable lessons now that you're in charge that you've learned?
I think the number one lesson is don't take over the CEO role of a company 2 months before a global pandemic hits. Um, seriously, I've learned that I have an amazing team at ORPC. We successfully and seamlessly closed the office and transitioned to remote operations in March in just a matter of days. I think without any direction from me, the team developed this 10 a.m. daily coffee chat for employees to drop in and talk about water cooler topics virtually. And I know that sounds like a small thing, but it was, during the dark days of April and May, I think it was just a real positive thing that people looked forward to every day. And then they also came up with a Thursday teach-in session where, someone in the firm spends 30 minutes taking the entire company through what they've been working on. And this has been a great way to maintain, the connectivity of the team, and then also help the team keep informed about, we have a lot of innovation and a lot of interesting projects we're working on. So keeping everybody informed about that. And so, also we've been able to reopen the office here, both in Maine and Montreal, and we've been able to, as I mentioned, successfully maintain operations in Igiugig, Alaska, which was really important to not only the success of the project, but the success of the company. So, despite coronavirus, I believe we've accomplished a lot, and we're super excited about what lies ahead. But coming back to your original question, you learn. What have I learned? I learned a lot about the people. I think you learn a lot about people you work with in a crisis, and I've learned. I work with an amazing group of people every day, and that's why I'm just excited I took the job. And I think as we were talking earlier, it gets me jumping out of bed every morning.
Well, that's good to hear. So speaking of what lies ahead, it's 2030, ORPC, you said you're a strategy guy. Ideal, magic wand. How many units have you deployed and what parts of the world?
So it's an interesting question just in terms of the path. I mean, I say to people all the time, I'm not worried about how quickly we'll deploy units 50 to 500. It's really getting people to adopt those first 50, because the market is actually enormous when you think about those billion people without either don't have power, they're using diesel generators. A lot of them live near tidal and river locations. So, we just took a small slice. If you said 1% of that population would meet our criteria, that's like a $400 billion market. So it's just it's hard to fathom. And, we have these conversations with people who come across our website, like our technology, and, they want to order 100 devices, so it's a challenging question. But my hope would be by 2030 that, we would be in 15 or 20 countries and have a multitude of projects going there. So, and just a lot of momentum in the business, and a market adoption that people that accepted the technology and were it was in their everyday calculus in terms of coming up with a 100% renewable solution. And my view is my vision would be as people are thinking about this, if you look, I sat through an interesting presentation where it was the CEOs of the leading solar and wind and hydropower companies in the US, and their forecast for 2030 was we would get to 50% of the electricity demand by 2030. And that assumed an 85-fold increase in battery. And you asked me earlier, I mean, one of the reasons I was attracted to ORPC is I feel like we need a third leg of the stool, or the platform, if you will, in addition to wind and solar. And river and tidal are different in that they are highly predictable. So they can be the base load resource to fully replace coal and natural gas. So to me, it's more of when you ask about 2035, to me, it's more of a vision where, I see a vision where you'd say, okay, I'm going to use river and tidal for a third of my power needs, and that's the base load. And then I'm going to use wind, solar, and battery storage for that other 2/3, and we have a grid we can absolutely manage. The intermittency can be handled with battery storage, and you have that, river entitlement, renewable, predictable base load there, really at the foundation of that. And to me, that would be my 2035 vision.
It's a beautiful vision. Question that came to mind when Chris started this company back in 2004. Do you have any idea what his aha moment was and why he decided to start it?
So yeah, we've had a couple beers over the last couple years, and I think there's a ocean current off the coast of Florida, and there's they're throughout the world, but there's pretty good pace to that ocean current. And he originally he and a couple other founders, were trying to figure out how do we harness that ocean current energy, because that's obviously it's an underwater river basically, so it's highly predictable, and it's not too far off the Florida coast. And so I think the idea there was, could we build a device that could rest on the bottom of the ocean and generate power from that? So that was really the inspiration behind the company.
It's very interesting. It's a 16-year journey, and now you've taken over. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do in the future. I'm very excited about your technology and all the opportunities out there.
Oh, great. Thank you, and I appreciate that.
Of course. So, last question. If you could share some words of advice or wisdom with the audience, it could be professional or personal, what would it be?
So, it's another challenging question. I think between my time at Sanctity and taking over as CEO of ORPC, I've met with a lot of entrepreneurs in a number of industries, and I've even invested a few dollars here and there with a few of them. But what's been interesting to me, it's one, it's been really invigorating, and then two, I think for your listeners who are maybe my age, or in their 40s or older, I would encourage them to find ways to engage with entrepreneurs in areas that interest them. So when I left Bain Capital in 2016, I just had coffees and breakfasts with whoever, if you recommended that I grab coffee with someone, I did that. And I talked to a lot of young entrepreneurs and met with them. And what I found is, this is why I would encourage people to engage in this. Is like you have a lot to offer to a young CEO or entrepreneur. You can bring a lot of advice. You have a network of connections that you can bring to really help these companies prosper. It was amazing how many times in these breakfasts or lunches or coffees where they would say, "Look, I'm trying to find someone who has experience with this," and I'd be like, "Oh, well, I coach soccer with someone who does that, and let me put you in touch with them." So if I look back over the last 20 years, these entrepreneurial companies are the real job creators in the economy. But as great as the U.S. is at developing these companies, I actually even think we could do a better job and accelerate the advancement of a lot more of these companies if they had the access to the expertise, talent, and networks of my fellow Gen Xers, who and in return, I think they'd get a lot of personal satisfaction out of helping some of these companies make it.
That resonates very strongly with me. I've been mentoring and kind of guiding tech startups here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area for about 5 or 6 years, and I used to have a 3 coffees a week, 3 new people a week, no transaction, no agenda. Let's just have a conversation, figure out where we are in life. And what I found more often than not is that, from a common denominator standpoint, we find out that we all have similar wants and needs, but the opportunity to guide, like you said, a young entrepreneur or young CEO and tell them that, perhaps you don't have to have all the answers right now or whatever that might be, I think is very helpful.
I would agree. So it's great to hear you doing that.
Once COVID's over, I look forward to getting back to it. So, Stuart, I've really enjoyed speaking with you. Again, I'm genuinely super interested in what you're doing. I think there's a phenomenal opportunity out there. Before we go, is there anything else you'd like to share or something I didn't ask you that perhaps you'd like to answer?
No, I mean, I think we covered it. I mean, I think the one thing maybe I would touch on is, what's been surprising to me is how the conversation is so focused on the monetary cost of, cost per megawatt hour for electricity, as opposed to all the negative externalities that are out there. And I get in these meetings and I scratch my head where on the one hand, everyone in the meeting says, I believe in the climate science, and the climate science says we have 8 to 12 years to reduce our carbon emissions, or we're going to have irreversible changes. So to me, if the goal is to eliminate CO2 emissions, shouldn't we be adopting energy solutions that have the lowest life cycle CO2 emissions of anything out there? And it's amazing to me how the utility industry and the fossil fuel industry just dominates that conversation and controls the narrative. And I think as I was talking to my family about this, I listened to attended a recent webinar where a Yale professor was talking about sea level rise, and that he was mentioning that if Greenland's ice caps melt, the sea levels go up 50 feet, and if Antarctica melts, it's 200 feet, and then 2 days later, I read that, the Greenland, he's like, but, it's not melting that bad. And then it was like, 2 weeks later, there's the report that, Greenland's ice caps are melting, 5 times the rate as we thought they were. And it's, to me, it's like, okay, if you do any kind of math and you say, okay, sea levels rise 10 feet, 20 to 50 million Americans are going to have to relocate, right? So, or more. So, what's the cost of that? And I think there's this assumption that, the do nothing case is the worst case scenario for the outcome of our path here on emissions, and that, we could get to the Paris Agreement or better. And I look at it and say, the world is full of, 4, 5, and 6 sigma events. I mean, in my investment career, we used to do, this, decision tree analysis where you'd probability of weight, put weighted probabilities to these, low, less than 1%, but high severity type of events. And it skews how you look at the world. And I think that's really been ignored in this dialogue. And I look at what coronavirus has done to emissions, right? We just had we're going to have like an 8 or 9% drop globally. That's kind of a 6 sigma event that, was unplanned. Well, we could have one that's the other way, and it could be devastating. So I think this narrative needs to, I don't know, the discussion around what's the true cost and what's the measure of it, I believe really needs to change.
So I agree strongly. And so 2 things you said, the coronavirus, there you go, low probability, high severity. There's one right there. And the conversation around externalities, it's been coming up a lot recently. And, with guests and among my peer group too, I had a guest, I think a few weeks ago, and we were talking about the externalities in the food system, for example. So the conversation started with, the processed foods that have been happening for the last 30, 40 years. And the healthcare system now bearing the brunt of that, and the individuals themselves, but the food companies have not. So to your point, I think there's a lot more conversations that need to be had, and then obviously action taking these externalities under consideration. You mentioned a rise in 10 feet. There are several island nations that 10 feet will be devastating. Yes, America, parts of America, but globally speaking, it will cause, tragedy and devastation. And so I think those conversations need to be had more often, louder, and hopefully action taken too.
I agree.
Stuart, thank you again so much for your time today. I really enjoyed speaking with you. And I look forward to watching the growth of ORPC and seeing what you do next.
Well, thank you for having me on and giving me the opportunity to tell our story. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Happy holidays.
Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please give us a rating and review on iTunes. And you can show your support by sharing our show with a friend, or reach out to us on social media, where you'll find us under our Nexus PMG handle. If there's a subject or topic you'd like to hear about, send me an email, btu@nexuspmg.com, or contact me via our website, nexuspmg.com. And while you're there, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, where we share what we're reading and thinking about in the clean tech, green tech sectors. Bigger Than Us is a Nexus PMG production.